For much of the Beatles' career, George Harrison was forced to stand in the shadow of John Lennon and Paul McCartney. That was the public image, at least. Lennon and McCartney were the band's songwriting giants. They were the partnership responsible for most of the Beatles' biggest songs, while Harrison was often treated as the quiet guitarist waiting patiently for his turn. But George Martin understood something that many people were slower to recognize. Harrison was not simply the Beatles' third songwriter. He was a musician with a completely different kind of imagination. While Lennon brought confrontation and McCartney brought melody, Harrison brought curiosity. He was constantly searching for new sounds, new philosophies, new ways of looking at music. His songs could be deeply romantic one moment, spiritually profound the next, and then suddenly strange, sarcastic, or musically adventurous. George Martin, the legendary producer who helped shape the Beatles' sound, witnessed that transformation from the beginning. He saw Harrison grow from a young guitarist struggling to establish himself into a songwriter capable of creating some of the most distinctive music in the Beatles' catalog. And these 8 songs reveal exactly why Martin always saw something special in George Harrison. Number 1. Taxman.
The Taxman. Yeah, the Taxman.
When Revolver opened with Taxman, listeners immediately heard something different. The song was aggressive, sarcastic, and almost confrontational. Harrison was no longer simply writing about love or trying to find his place within the Lennon-McCartney songwriting partnership. He was angry. The British tax system had taken a huge portion of the Beatles' earnings, and Harrison turned that frustration into one of the most memorable opening tracks in rock history. But the genius of Taxman was not simply its subject matter. Harrison understood that the song needed a sound as sharp as its lyrics. The distorted guitars, the relentless rhythm, and the strange sense of humor created something that felt unlike the polite pop music the Beatles had once been known for. It was a declaration. George Harrison had discovered that his songwriting did not need to imitate Lennon or McCartney. He could be cynical, he could be political, he could be funny. He could create an entire musical world of his own. And George Martin was there to help him bring that world to life. Number 2. Within You, Without You. If Taxman showed Harrison discovering his voice, Within You, Without You showed him discovering an entirely new musical language. The song was unlike anything the Beatles had previously recorded. Inspired by Indian music and Harrison's growing interest in Eastern philosophy, the track was built around sitar, tabla, tambura, and a deeply meditative atmosphere. For some listeners, it was an unexpected detour. For Harrison, it was something far more important. He was trying to express ideas about the ego, human connection, and the illusion of separation. These were not conventional pop subjects, yet Harrison managed to bring them into the world of the Beatles without reducing them to a novelty. That was one of his greatest strengths. He did not simply borrow Indian instruments to make the Beatles sound exotic. He was genuinely searching for a different way to understand music. George Martin understood the importance of that ambition. The producer knew that Harrison's musical curiosity could take the Beatles into places that Lennon and McCartney alone might never have explored. Within You, Without You was proof that Harrison was not merely expanding his songwriting, he was expanding the definition of what a Beatles song could be. Number 3. While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
While my guitar gently weeps.
By the time Harrison wrote While My Guitar Gently Weeps, his confidence as a songwriter had grown considerably. But the song still faced a problem. The Beatles were often so focused on Lennon and McCartney that Harrison's compositions could struggle to receive the attention they deserved. Harrison knew he had written something special. It was melancholy, mysterious, and emotionally enormous. Its lyrics looked at a world filled with human failure, confusion, and missed opportunities. But Harrison wanted the guitar itself to become part of the emotional story. That led him to Eric Clapton. Clapton's presence on the recording gave the song an added intensity, but the real achievement belonged to Harrison's composition. The melody was powerful enough to stand on its own, while the guitar became almost like another voice. This was Harrison at his most dramatic. He was no longer trying to compete with Lennon and McCartney on their terms. He had found his own. George Martin understood that Harrison's greatest strength was often his ability to create atmosphere. He could take a simple musical idea and surround it with a feeling that seemed larger than the song itself. While My Guitar Gently Weeps remains one of the clearest examples. Number 4. The Inner Light.
Without going out of my door.
The Inner Light was another example of Harrison refusing to follow the conventional rules of pop songwriting. The song was recorded with Indian musicians in Bombay, while Harrison added vocals and other elements in London. The result felt like a musical journey across continents. But the song's greatest achievement was not simply its instrumentation. It was the way Harrison transformed philosophical ideas into something intimate and melodic. The lyrics suggest that wisdom and understanding do not necessarily require physical travel. The world, Harrison suggested, could be discovered through reflection and inner awareness. That idea was deeply connected to his spiritual interests. Yet the song never felt like a lecture. Harrison understood the importance of melody. He knew that even the most philosophical ideas needed emotional accessibility if they were going to reach an audience. That balance between deep thought and beautiful songwriting was one of the qualities George Martin recognized in him. Harrison was becoming a songwriter who could make complex ideas feel simple. Number 5. Something.
Something in the way she moves.
There is perhaps no better example of George Harrison's songwriting genius than Something. By 1969, Harrison was no longer the uncertain songwriter who had once struggled to get his compositions onto Beatles albums. Something was different. It was elegant, romantic, and emotionally direct. The melody moved with a natural grace, while the arrangement gave the song a sense of grandeur without overwhelming its intimacy. Even John Lennon and Paul McCartney recognized its quality. The song became Harrison's first major Beatles A-side and one of the most celebrated compositions in the band's catalog. But the most impressive thing about Something is how effortless it sounds. There is no obvious attempt to shock the listener, no experimental gimmick, no complicated philosophical argument, just a beautiful melody, a deeply memorable chorus, and a feeling that seems almost impossible to explain. That was the genius of Harrison. After years of experimentation, he had learned that sophistication did not always require complexity. Sometimes the most difficult thing a songwriter can do is write something that sounds completely natural. Something proved that George Harrison had finally reached the same creative level as the two songwriters who had dominated the Beatles for so long. Number 6. Here Comes the Sun.
Here comes the sun. Here comes the sun.
If Something showed Harrison's mastery of romance, Here Comes the Sun showed his ability to turn personal relief into universal emotion. Harrison wrote the song during a period when the Beatles were surrounded by tension, business problems, and internal disagreements. Instead of writing another song about conflict, Harrison stepped away from it. He went to Eric Clapton's house, spent time in the garden, and found inspiration in the arrival of spring. The result was one of the uplifting songs the Beatles ever recorded. But Here Comes the Sun is far more sophisticated than its simple structure might suggest. The arrangement moves through changing time signatures, unusual rhythmic patterns, and subtle shifts that give the song its sense of motion. Yet none of that complexity gets in the way of the melody. That was Harrison's achievement. He could experiment without making the listener feel as though they were listening to an experiment. George Martin had always understood that true musical intelligence was not necessarily about showing the audience how clever you were. It was about knowing exactly when to make complexity disappear. Here Comes the Sun is one of the greatest examples of that principle in popular music. Number 7. Long, Long, Long. Some of Harrison's greatest songs were not his most obvious. Long, Long, Long from the Beatles is a perfect example. Compared with the enormous drama of While My Guitar Gently Weeps or the immediate beauty of Here Comes the Sun, the song is almost ghostly. It begins quietly and gradually builds an atmosphere of uncertainty, longing, and spiritual reflection. Harrison was not interested in making every song announce itself. He understood the power of restraint. The arrangement leaves space for silence, texture, and subtle emotion. The song feels as if it is constantly on the edge of disappearing, which makes every sound feel more important. This was another side of the genius George Martin recognized in Harrison. He understood that Harrison did not always need to fill the studio with ideas. Sometimes his greatest musical instinct was knowing what to leave out. Long, Long, Long is proof that Harrison's imagination could be just as powerful when he whispered as when he created something enormous. Number 8. All Things Must Pass. By the time the Beatles came to an end, George Harrison had accumulated an extraordinary collection of songs. Many of them had never been recorded by the band. For years, Harrison had been writing music while operating within a group dominated by the Lennon-McCartney partnership. His solo work finally gave him the freedom to explore everything he had been unable to express. All Things Must Pass became one of the clearest examples. The song carries a sense of acceptance, change, and impermanence, but beneath its spiritual message is something deeply personal. Harrison had lived through the rise and fall of the Beatles. He had experienced fame, conflict, artistic frustration, and enormous success. Now he was looking at the idea that nothing lasts forever. The song felt like both a farewell and a beginning, and perhaps that is why it reveals so much about Harrison's genius. He was never interested in simply preserving the past. He was always moving towards something else. George Martin saw that quality long before the rest of the world fully appreciated it. He understood that Harrison's quietness did not mean a lack of ambition. It meant that Harrison was often listening to ideas that other people could not yet hear. That is ultimately what makes these songs so important. George Harrison's genius was never identical to John Lennon's or Paul McCartney's. He didn't need to be. His music came from a different place, one shaped by curiosity, spirituality, experimentation, irony, beauty, and almost constant search for something beyond the obvious. George Martin helped the Beatles become one of the greatest bands in history, but he also witnessed something else, the emergence of George Harrison. And when you listen closely to these songs, it becomes clear that the quiet Beatle was never simply waiting for his moment, he was preparing for it. And when that moment finally arrived, he proved that he had been a genius all along.